Yeah, I'll give a synopsis of kind of what went down here. I guess Richard Dolan opened it up with, a lot of interesting research that he'd done into this sort of, is there a secret space program? Are there crash retrieval teams? Or where might these things be? Where might, these things be operating out of? And shared some interesting points and some stuff on that.
We also have Tony Rodriguez here. Share some.
They had Nick Pope there. We also had Tony Rodriguez, who's sitting here with me now, sharing his story. He's one of the guys that claims he was part of this secret space program, or a witness to it, and inducted into it. And so that's some interesting stuff. We also had Nick Pope on to talk about what he's doing. He's co-hosting the Basement Office now with Stephen Greenstreet, which is an interesting show. And also, let me see who else was speaking. There was a couple of these, like I said, the secret space program witnesses. Chris here, and then who else presented? I presented yesterday, and Mark presented, and that sort of I think that was just sort of stole the show with a lot of people's expectations and the attention, that they didn't realize, wow, there's so much technology and like real science hidden in these declassified documents and that came out of these programs and these government programs. And I think that's important, because the government's, we spent 20 million or so at least of our tax dollars on the ATIP program and stuff, so it's deserving that we should get some of that technology, some of that information and technology out of that. But then
Mark, I see Mark giving me a look. What is the look?
Oh, I'm looking at what's happening over here. So,
oh,
to my right here, we have Tony Rodriguez, and he's in the middle of making a sketch. So Tony's what you call one of those 20 and backers, and he's a pretty humble guy. He's telling a story. It's nothing about it is glamorous. And I was pressing him last night for any engineerable data of any technology that he saw. He has nothing on the crafts, nothing on any of the health stuff. But what he did see was they had this gravity plating when he was on a Basin series. And while he was walking from, I'll let him tell the story.
Oh, I'm on. I didn't know. Can they hear me?
Yeah, they can hear you. You're on right now.
Hi, guys. So admittedly, it's hard pill to swallow, the information that I've shared, but I've been researched by Dr. Sala, a bunch of researchers, quite Q&A. There's a lot of overlap with my testimony with other testimonies. And there's a lot of things that I knew when I got my memories back that were corroborated with the insiders and actually government insiders that panned out. And so since I've researched the things that I remembered going through, a lot of things that I researched panned out. I called out the salt spots on Ceres, that in fact was a geyser. And the early dawn probe back in 2015 and 2016, I said the early dawn probe results were that it was sulfur and a bunch of other minerals. And I said, no, it's salt. There's a slight amount of magnesium in there. That was a geyser. And then in August of 2020, NASA confirmed that it was in fact briny salt. So that was something that corroborated my story. And that's why I still talk about it. But what I remember is that inside the planetoid series was a breakaway group, about 250,000 people living. They had artificial gravity plating. They had miles of it, millions of square feet that was all powered. And they had giant oxygen making machines that were the size of a 2-story house. And they had several of those that turned out, and they had a giant hangar base. And they were infrastructure that was built inside something that ETs had left behind, that had been abandoned. So everything was connected by trains. I lived there about 12 years out of my time there. And on the last 3 years of it, I was promoted to the point where I was a cargo engineer on a ship, and I had freedom to move about, and it was under heavy construction. And one of my trips out, when I got off at a train stop, I connected, and they were installing the gravity plating, the flooring, and I was able to see a pile of it and see a look of it. And what I remember is that the breakthrough that they said, one of the things they had octagon shaped, the size of a coffee can. They had two hard plates about 14 inches thick, and in between they had rows of, I don't know if you guys can see this. They had rows of a lead looking metal. They said was an alloy that was mixed with an exotic metal. It was an inert metal mixed with an exotic metal. They were shaped about the size of a coffee can. They said the octagon shape was actually the trick. So I don't know if that's what they did to squeeze them in tighter. Like, I don't know the amount of them that they had in between the plates. I drew 9 here. It could have been as many as they could have fit in there. They had 2 major coils that looked like brake lines that were connecting the plates, and each of them plugged into each other with nodes that were powered. They were about 1 meter by 1 meter sized, in square foot. When the plate, it was about 1 meter by 1 meter, and they all plugged in together, and every so often they had a plate that helped power it. It was a marvel. It was something we always talked about because it went on for miles, literally. The range of artificial gravity was about 30 feet, about 10 meters above this. And the plates inside the ships, the grav mat, they called it, was actually the official name was grav mat. The mats on the ship, the beams were focused and they would cross, so they only had a shorter amount. Instead of the 30 feet up, they would cross the beams. And there were people that had to go to the doctor because their workstations would be where the beams crossed, and they would get hip injuries or leg and joint injuries if they had to work inside where the beams crossed for a long time. I'm not a tech guy, to be honest with you. This is what I saw.
I got some tech stuff questions to ask about. One of the things you said was this 30 feet. They said the field drops off after 30 feet.
You also mentioned.
So that would
yesterday that it-
imply like a more than 1/r² relationship. That's like an R1/r³ or something if it's dropping off after only 30 feet.
Right. So there was a phys ed program in the gymnasium, and they had purposely built the gymnasium to be like 32 feet, or just enough to where it was a challenge to throw a ball up and have it stay outside of the gravity without hitting the ceiling and bouncing back down. It was kind of a game. And when you go there, there'd be a bunch of gym balls laying up there. The fall off was very little, was slight, was the last 5 feet or so when the gravity would fall off. It was constant up till about the last 5 feet, and then there was fall off that they would talk about.
So it's not the R².
Yeah, well, that's one of the things that would be, if you're creating an artificial gravity field, then it drops off after 30 feet. then
So
it's-
coincidentally, the ship was also hard capped at 10 meters. 10 meters kept coming up. The ship was hard capped. They said that even when the ship was damaged, it would still stay. They didn't have any landing gear. The bigger ships had no landing gear at all. Once they were turned on, they never landed. And they were hard capped above every surface at 30 feet or 10 meters. Everything was in metric. 10 meters above.
So we're looking at these octagon shaped things over here. They look. Was it similar to like a beehive?
So they looked like lead. They were like a dark gray material. They looked heavy.
There's holes in them too.
And they were hollow. They had holes going down the center of them, and they were octagon shaped. So I don't know if they were packed in more tightly. There was a screw, there was a power coupling here, and then they had like a male female where they plugged into each other, would be on the side too. And there was the motherboard. They would have motherboards and circuitry going in between them. So that's
where was the
because of backwards.
coil? Oh, yeah, I think you're missing it from the picture. Like,
Yeah.
coils, where were they?
So these are my coils. So they had one on each corner, like a coil, and it looked like a brake line, to be honest. It was about the 1/4 inch size of a metal coil that was flexible. They had one on each side. Like, I've got one here and one here. But I wish I had more for you guys, but I literally I was in between train stops. I got off the train and was going to another train stop down, and I saw a pile of these, and I poked my head in and looked at it. We were all impressed by the way that the grav mat worked. The other thing is these were adjustable. There were ETs that were used to lighter weight. There were the larger ETs come from lesser gravity planets. The heavy gravity planets produce shorter, more stout ETs, and they had a wristband or a jewelry or something that would adjust it as they walked. So if you walked near one, you could feel the gravity depreciate. So they were adjustable. They would have something that would adjust the gravity to their environment so that they were comfortable. It wasn't too often. but there were ETs that did have that happen. And so I don't know. I flat out don't know if 30 feet was the limit or if it was just a power consumption thing. Like the power output was a big deal not only on the ships, but in the colony as well. They were limited on how far they could build these things out by their power output. And it was a big deal for them. Power was something they always complained about. And so I believe they took a great deal of power.
That was the main thing in Star Trek is like, where do we send the power? Because they're attacking. Was there any other clues about how this worked? Oh, I see Pablo has his hand raised, and I guess we can go to open discussion. We'll start asking questions. Again, Tony, I grilled him last night. He doesn't really know much more than what he saw, and
I know.
Yeah.
grilled him also asking, was there any plastic involved? I'm thinking maybe it's an LC circuit. Maybe there's a capacitor there, and maybe the metal wasn't touching both sides, but he doesn't remember seeing any plastic.
Well, and again, we want to be sensitive to time also, because Paulo had some concerns about us going too long, right?
I don't want to waste your guys' time here. It's just that
no, it's not a waste of time. It's
the octagon shape I know was something that
was
they said
important, right?
it was important. They said that they had researched it, and it was what's the word?
Resonating?
No, what do you call it? Where it was like the power that it took was intermittent until they changed that shape. So it was something like that. So I might be a little bit wrong on it, but the changing the shape of that material to an octagon shape and packing them in was what solved it, basically, from conversations that I overheard. And like I said, it's akin to walking and listening to people that are working in a nuclear power plant. You don't know how it works afterwards, but you can, you pick up a thing or two, and that's kind of what it was. But I remember that the octagon, and like I said, each of those was about the size of a coffee can, a Folgers can, was about the size of it. I think if I had to remember right and guess, I'd say the height of it was about 14 inches, but I know that they were about a meter or 1.1 meter by square. In square footage was the size of each one.
okay. Well, thank you. Yeah. So Mark, did you guys want to take over hosting the conference now, or
Yeah, I'm still setting up my computer because it's 100% complete. It's just doing something, I don't know, and it's almost done. Because right now, my audience watching this live on YouTube cannot hear you; they can only hear us.
okay?
So let's continue with our presentation, so they wouldn't miss out. Mark Ferrantino, I think you had a question for Tony.
Yeah, if anyone has
or
questions,
comment.
yeah.
Let's try to keep it, off the Secret Space program, just solely on the technology that he was that he saw.
Actually, I had just left my hand up from before. I just took it down just right now. Sorry
Okay.
about that.
One thing that struck me interesting that may be of interest to people here is this shape is similar to what we see in a beehive. And Rabinnikov talked about beehives and the geometry being important with some of his experimentation. Maybe there's some connection there. Hitting a resonance in such a shape may make a difference.
The other thing about the question about no unlimited power. So they had units that were free energy, but they only had so much output, and they were limited by the material that it was made out of. They were getting material from ETs that were closer to the center of the galaxy and much more faster star forming regions. There was an exotic material that helped them build free energy, larger ones, power output. So that was a military issue, and they guarded the really high output generators were a classified thing between the ETs. So yes, there's free power, but petawatts and beyond is something that was like a military thing. Like there were a different class of ships that had a great deal of power output, and it was guarded. And it was a requirement on it. It was dependent on a exotic material that was found towards the center of galaxies. That I remember.
And
That's that question.
Pablo was asking about the size of each octagon. I think you.
Yeah, like I said,
Folger.
it was about a Folger can, right around a Folger can size. It was a heavy unit. Like these were heavy. They were forklifted into place. You know, like
Did you see any
when
of
they
them
were in the
physically
gravity area.
damaged? Were any of them physically damaged like that might?
Well, the pile that I went, they weren't fully assembled either.
And there was no plastic components or dielectrics visible.
There were plastic and it looked like a computer motherboard.
Here, pick it up so they can see.
There were motherboards. Where am I at here? There were computer components. Let's suck at this. Right here. This thing is in our way. So there were every now and then there were computer components in each individual one. So I don't know if that was about power or what.
You also mentioned you saw a pipe that looked like a piece of coax or something.
Well, that was this.
Oh, that was that
this one.
main, that big.
The other thing
coil.
is it had, I don't have these really represented here, but it had like a pipe that limited it, you know, that kept it like in the four corners of it, it had a pipe that was a hard surface.
What was that pipe made out of?
It just looked like a galvanized, like a conduit pipe. It was just a structural,
Did you see anything there that was not silverish color, like copper? Or
it was all
gold?
dull. It all looked like industrial, like just raw alloy,
All right,
not shiny.
we got a couple questions. This one comes from the audience. This one comes from Joe Rogan. He wants to know, have you ever smoked DMT before?
No.
I'm just kidding. Do you fear disclosing this?
It's too late. I've been at this for 6 years. So I have a website, TonyRodriguez.com. My book was a bestseller. I've been 300 plus interviews on YouTube. I have a Patreon channel. I've been on Gaia TV. I've been at this for 6 years. This is old news. It's too late. I came out and disclosed in 2016. I did a few interviews and when immediately I was taken by the Air Force. I was interrogated by the Air Force at one point. I was also contacted by Special Forces and offered to be a consultant for them when dealing with other things that I can't say. And this is all water under the bridge as far as me being afraid of talking about it.
Did they force you to sign an NDA for that? For any of those?
I can't say.
You can't say whether you signed an NDA.
I can't say.
Okay. Okay, that's interesting.
All right,
Yes,
so your name
They're a
again?
solid metal. They were a solid metal.
The
So once-
hexagons are solid metal.
Yep.
And there's no liquid inside, right?
And once
Not that I
again,
know. I didn't see it finished.
It's Chris.
You also mentioned that you thought you saw like hexagon female sides that they could fit into. Was that?
Well, like these, well, that's what
Hold it up.
so we were talking and he was kind of asking if there was a coupling or some kind of like a buffer, like a insulator that they sat in between. And I thought that there may have been like a little chamfered, like a little I'll hold this on there. Where a little chamfered, like a recess that each individual one could sit into. I think that could be possible too, but I'm not 100% sure.
Who was in charge of assembling those? Was that like a separate?
They had a
team?
crew of guys. They had slave labor.
Like you, right?
Mhm. That's what the abduction thing is. It's slave labor. They abduct people, they go work for their time, and they put them back with no memory. That's why the economy of the secret space program, people go, how come there's $1 trillion ship? How's so many of these spaceships? They're not $1 trillion. They're using slave labor.
Slave labor that doesn't even remember it.
And then they
Most
delete
of
your
them.
memory and you go right back to your,
So
And
what's the
when,
process of
how
getting
long
your-
ago was this and when, like? the
I was
dates?
there, it would have been the late 90s. When I saw these plates would have been the equivalent of 97 or 98.
Wow, that's a long time ago. Well, when did you start getting your memories back of all this?
April of 2000, end of April, first 2 weeks of May of 2015. I had the memory recall event. There's quite a bit about it. It was studied.
And what is that like triggered by?
I got an MRI.
Oh, right. You mentioned that. You mentioned the MRI scan. Did they find
Any other
anything?
questions?
So the strong magnetic field is what you think undid some of whatever locked those memories away?
Well, it was there was like a perfect storm of events that brought the memories back. It's a whole subject people kind of debate about it. Ultimately, it happened in one blow where I just had a recall and I went, oh my God, that happened. And I went, oh my God, that happened. And then I staggered around, and the next day when I woke up, I thought I began still like I was getting years of memory at a time. And I remembered places on Earth, Peru and Seattle and Inyo Kern, California. And when I found those places on Google, I saw that they were real. Whoa. Yeah, let me get that there.
So it's only when you saw confirmation through known, Google Earth pictures and stuff like that.
So-
you remember that you started realizing these were real, not hallucinations.
Right. So I remembered living in places on Earth for a couple of years, a couple places that I'd never been, and I can prove that I've never been. And when I went on Google Earth, I thought, man, I should be able to find it. I had these memories and I couldn't solve what was going on. And I went to Google Earth, and lo and behold, found the house, found the place. And then I went there, the Seattle one. So Peru, I can't go there. I went to Seattle, and I knew the entire area. It was one of the islands around Seattle. I can't really divulge the name of the people publicly because
No problem with that. But getting back to the plating, you mentioned also that on board the spacecraft, there was a thinner version of plating
right
that had rounds
in between
instead-
decks of the ship, there were thinner ones, and instead of an octagon shape, they were encased. They had a cover. Each individual one had a cover around it, like a plastic cover. They look round.
plastic.
Yeah, it looked like it was plastic, and they were smaller. So
What-
where
what
these
color
were
was the plastic?
white, everything in the ship was white, was an off-white. They painted, even the metal was like an epoxy paint that was an off-white. So pretty much that was the theme. And then towards the front of the ship, the command area, they had carpet. They had black and red carpet with white walls. But those were a smaller system that was in between the decks of the ship, and they had problems. So there were areas in the ship that had less gravity or had a perturbed gravity. Like the main cargo bay in the back kept having cargo problems of getting scooted around, and they didn't know why. And so they would paint the floor. They painted the floor with a traction paint with an epoxy that had traction. That didn't work. It still scooted. And then they put grip tape down, and so then they tied it down, and the boxes got crushed. The cargo actually got crushed when they tied them up. So then they went back to the engineers, and they found out that it was when the ship performed a certain maneuver that it was perturbing the field at the very back of the ship. And so whenever they were going to perform any of those maneuvers, they made sure there was no cargo in that area. They had to quit putting cargo there, basically.
That's interesting, piece of possible engineerable data. Mark Fiorentino, you have a question?
Yeah, would you call that inertial leakage that caused that problem?
I think we made fun. We made fun of the guys in the seed bay for that they just didn't know how to stack things right. But I think it was the field that it made around so the ship had an oddball shape, and the field of the ship wasn't on center. So on the ship, when it performed maneuvers, like if you imagine the field that it made, that it moved, which I understood it was about 3 feet off the hull. Like when it went underwater as well, and it made the water weightless, so it pushed it out of the way. And my understanding was that it was about 3 feet off, or one meter, a little more than a meter off the hull, that the effect was. But because the ship, it wasn't a disc, it was like a pointed at one end, and the back end of it that was rounded off was where that effect would happen. So the field would move during certain maneuvers. I don't know what maneuvers, if it was barrel rolling, I don't know what, but certain maneuvers that it did would perturb the field, and it was a design flaw. It was a design flaw in that ship, which they had bought the chassis off. They had traded to get the chassis of that ship from an extraterrestrial race. They bought the chassis, and then they put their own systems in it, like their own chairs and things.
Just let me get this clear. So this ship was one of ours that we built, or one of theirs?
The ship belonged to the Ceres Colony Corporation.
The series. And who's that exactly?
We are a Deutsch breakaway civilization from the end of the 30s, and they're from the European, and they
Uh-huh. Okay.
went there and moved in. About 250,000 people live inside planetoid Ceres.
This is amazing. Okay. Thanks.
Sorry, I know it. Like I said, it's a hard pill to swallow if you'd never heard of it before. So I'm sorry, but in the interest of time, I'm just kind of dumping on you.
Yeah, it's fits with something I heard from somebody else entirely different, but so that doesn't really surprise me. It's a Norwegian kind of a thing.
So, Tony, you also mentioned that there were several craft that you were on, including an old submarine,
A converted submarine.
and it was falling apart, right? Do you remember anything about that? What was breaking? How was it fixed?
So it had a bunch of external tanks that they filled with liquids. Some of them were radioactive, but there was a system of liquids that would purge tanks and then cause a reaction. They would put something and that would engage it somehow. So I don't know exactly if that worked, what that was doing. I did maintenance in the bottom of the ship. There were a lot of corrosive chemicals that were going through all the pipes. So frequently, it was older. It was like seriously 1950s, 1940s tech that put it together. It was a converted submarine. And a lot of the chemicals that they used in it, they had changed. Like the systems were originally designed for water and steam. And
Instead, they were putting these corrosive.
yeah, if Brian's listening, there's actually quite a bit of proof, Brian, and my entire presentation here presented it. So I got proof for days, bro.
Oh, that's fine. But did you see any signs of like liquid mercury or anything high voltage going on there?
Damn it. People don't even tell me there's no audio for like 60 seconds and then they tell me.
Oh,
Oh, we got audio now?
I don't know if you can repeat the last 2 minutes, but
Okay, so let's
can you hear us now?
just recap that. I'm sorry about that, man. It's just
not a problem. Let's do that again, actually, and let's move the camera over a little bit. So we're all together in it. Oh, that's fine. So you were on a craft, also like one of those older submarines.
Was a
that were-
converted submarine that was converted into a ship, and it was probably built in the 40s. It was an older, it was the systems were meant to hold to put steam through it, and it was converted, and it was corrosive chemicals, like there was an acid that went through and there was a radioactive water.
Was there any major components of
nuclear
the
powered.
submarine that were changed out? Was there still an engine in there? Like, was there torpedo tubes?
Not that I'm aware of, no. It had been totally swapped out, and a lot of the system that enabled flight was external. They had added tanks around the outside of it that had liquids that enabled the field. So I don't know where it was. I never really saw the outside of the thing. I boarded it each day through an umbilical from the hangar area. But it had highly corrosive
Is that
materials.
normal for an umbilical entrance?
Yes,
You never would go up the steps.
there wasn't a catwalk. No, it was in its own bay, and there was an umbilical that went to the doors. There was a front and back, so I had my own entrance.
And you never saw an outside view of it, perhaps through
No.
a porthole or something?
No, not that one. And then that first like 6 years that I was on that ship was complete slave. I had no freedom or no ability to move. I got promoted before I could walk around the rest of the colony and see things. So, and I wanted to say, if we were like, again, that one guy said I got no proof. There's a ton of proof to my testimony. There's tons of proof.
And this
I
is-
can
this
go
is
on
not
for
about
hours
proving-
proving my testimony. If he wanted to say that, it was pretty rude.
This isn't really about proving, whether what you saw or not. We're trying to figure out if there's anything engineerable about this kind of testimony that we can do something with. I think the shape that you saw in that gravity floor that might, relate to something that Grabinikov saw. Maybe there's other people in the conference that might have suggestions similar suggestions about what exactly it is we're looking at here and how this can relate to anything that we know of. So what other kind of craft do you remember?
There was that, and then there was a disc craft that had the power unit in the center of it, and it had a liquid. There were liquids on top of each other that drained into the other, and there was a system that kept it going. There was actually like a tornado effect going in it. So that was the power system. I don't think it was the flight system. The flight system was on the
That's funny because
external.
Mark McCandless talked about somebody who was abducted who saw that exact same thing, a tornado in the center.
Also, there was a double disc craft that was the fastest one that they had, the fastest A to B flight. So they had 3 modes of flight. They had an external assisted jump mode that would work with Anomaly, a tear in time space, like an anomaly in space. They would go to it, and then they had an entire mode that they could jump with that. They had a singular jump mode that the craft could instantly jump, and they had A to B flight that was anti-grav tech. The double disc was an oval shaped disc that had the entire system on the outside of it, had a hollow center. I don't know where the power was, if it was up in the ceiling of it, but it was a cargo craft and it was the fastest A to B flyer that they had. It was the shape of a,
And what was the flight times roughly?
from Ceres to Jupiter in mid, what is it, perihelion or midway, not the full way, was like 16 hours.
And when it was,
If it didn't jump, if it went A to B. And then when it was closer, when the orbits were closer, it was like a 4-hour.
4 hour, and how
flight.
far was it from Mars when they were close?
We really never went to Mars from Ceres. Like it was a separate corporation. We didn't go to Saturn. We went to Ganymede. We went to Jupiter almost every day. Right there is where a lot of the trade takes place. And we went outside of the solar system and did trade missions. Sorry, guys. I know you guys are in science and this sounds like fantastical to you, but
I mean,
sorry to tell you
we're
that
trying to build these kind of
the more I
crafts.
research, the things I remember, the more they pan out.
We're trying to see if there is anything engineerable. Somebody else asked, Will Rican asked, what were these craft made of? Do you know any materials? Did you recognize any metals or any plastics or
The
anything?
exterior of the cargo craft looked like a stealth craft. It was black and smooth, and it had radar reflective material on it. It was so that we could go to other lesser developed worlds or any other place for that matter and be radar indetectable. They did say that the craft had the ability to mildly cloak, like not like in the movies, but like mildly like adapt, but they didn't use it. It wasn't that effective. It was radar that they were worried about. Everything was made out of metal. Like I said, it was plush. It looked like an airplane with carpet in the front where the command crew was. And as you went to the back, it looked more, it was metal.
Okay, what other questions do we have here?
He left, man. He's already at the airport.
Tell us everything we don't know, please. I think Tony doesn't really, you weren't really privy to that kind of information from
No.
your story. Like, it's not something they would share.
Brian, if you're subscribed, go ahead and hit me up. Drop me an email, buddy. I'll shoot you a video. We can talk privately. I'll present you with proof. Or at least things you can't explain away.
If there's any other questions in the, Mark Ferrantino, you want to unmute yourself? We can go to open discussion here and just discuss all this thing.
Yeah. Were you ever on a craft that went faster than the speed of light?
The crafts would jump immediately. So no, it did not fly A to B faster than light. There was no, we didn't do that. The craft would create a wormhole or whatever. I hate the word portal, but it would jump immediately to other systems. And the farther that you went, and it could jump distance, it could also jump back in time.
So it's more like Stargate then.
The farther that it went, the more power it needed. So if the ship only had enough power to jump 2 systems over, it had to wait and jump again. And it took time to power up. It took 15 to 30 minutes to repower and jump again. The more output of the ship, the farther it could go in one single jump. And the military ships, the battleships could go very far and they could jump immediately again. Like they had systems that let them jump immediately. Ours was a cargo ship and we would jump and we had to wait for it to repower up and jump again.
Huh. Did it use a magnetic field to create this portal or opening?
I really don't know how it did it, to be honest with you. I know that if we jumped into an atmosphere, ice was a problem. The ship would get a layer of ice on the outside of it. So the effect from when it appeared would cause supercooling on the outside of the ship, and there would be thick ice if we jumped. So they had to jump into somewhere outside of an atmosphere and then fly A to B down to the planet. The ship never just jumped into the atmosphere.
And what would happen when ice formed? Would that weigh down the craft? Would it?
It would block optics, it would block sensors, it was dangerous for the craft, and it would damage the coating that was on the craft, the radar reflective material. It was super bad. They did it a couple of times, but they didn't want to do it. It was quite a bit of ice. We're talking 3 inches thick. of
Oh,
ice.
this is important data because on UFO, some of the UFO research have looked at these craft with thermal images or the UAPs, and they found that they were extremely cold on the surface. So this does fit in with that. Any idea why it was like that?
No, it was an effect from the method of jumping. It was a consequence of the technology of jumping.
So can I ask 3 questions? How long did your trip last? And you were able to understand what they were saying, and did you came back here on Earth because of your
Yeah, translator technology, they could turn it on and off. I'd sit in on meetings and they could turn it off. They would be speaking in German and they could turn on the translator. We had implants. We had been through a lot of surgical procedures. There was something else, another part of that question.
Yeah, how long did the trip last?
We were back every day so this is another part of the testimony is we would come back. This is a form of, they called it anti-telephoning. The ship would leave at 7 a.m. in the morning and come back at 6:55, 5 minutes before it left, 5 minutes away. And they could visibly see if the ship was back in the place that it was supposed to be. If it didn't come back to the spot it was supposed to be, or didn't come back at all, they would scrub the mission and it wouldn't go. So they could have, aggressive missions planned. So they could aggressively go out and try to steal technology or acquire tech. And if something bad happened to the ship, it would not come back prior. We got back at the same time we left. By the time we docked, it was like 20 minutes to get back to the hangar. And so I would get on the ship at 8 in the morning and get back 20 after 8 and get off the ship and have the whole day. Series was, they had it on like an 18.5-hour day, the sunlight, the lights, and we would do maintenance or go to school and go back to our room.
Does it rotate, series? What's the actual day on the planetoid?
It's super slow. There's cold traps on it. There's places that, so the doors to the hangar where the sunlight only shined on the doors to the hangar inside a crater once every 6 months or something. It was really slow. There were cold traps, basically craters where sunlight never got into. And they put the doors to the hangar in that area so that they wouldn't be obvious.
Will Rieken wrote, it appears that people who know the science of materials apparently never remember anything about their service. Do you think that's because you have no technical knowledge that this is the reason why you remember and others don't?
You know, it's up for debate how I got my memories back. The reason is most people don't remember something. It's a very small percentage of people that even get their memories back. The other thing is there are plenty of people that have all their memories and they come back, but they get a paycheck. And if they go public, then they have to pay the money back plus go to jail. So there's a lot of people that may have a lot of technical knowledge and actually never got their memories erased, but they got paid $500,000. And if they go public, they have to pay it back.
That's fair enough. Anything you can remember about when you were on board that that submarine style craft, about what was running through the pipes? If it touched your hand, what would happen? You get a burn?
So there were only a few pipes in there that were radioactive. They were large. So the bigger pipes, we're talking 18, 20 inches around, had radioactive material that went through them. The rest of them had corrosive material. So I don't know if it was a full-on acid, but it was highly corrosive. And then some of them did have steam. There were such systems that ran on steam, like I don't know if it was, I don't know what it was, but there was hot water that went through some of them.
You were just basically a welder popping new pipes in and
The valves.
the
So they had
valves.
shut-off valves that went through the bottom of the ship, and we had pressure regulation valves that would go bad, and we would have to cut them and put on new pressure valves that we could get the readout. And then the on-off valves inside of them would rust out, so we would cut those and put new ones on it. And we topped off hydraulic oils and some of the other fluids. We would top them off.
What was hydraulic fluid being used for?
Probably to open the doors or articulate something, or there were large macro items that moved somewhere else on the ship.
Was there any way of looking outside of the ship to see where you were?
Not where I was. I was in the bottom of the ship, there was no windows in the bottom of it. So on the MVL, this is on the submarine. On the MVL, the other cargo ship that I worked, there was on the C deck, there was an observation deck. There was a deck that had the galley and the bathroom. It was the middle of the ship, and it was a big long hallway, and they had observation. There was a roof to seal from the floor to the roof. There was a window, and it would turn on and off. They could make it turn gray, and you couldn't see through it. And there were portholes, and they would match the wall.
Do you know if there was an artificial gravity? Like, could you walk around like you can walk right now?
Yes, absolutely. And you could not tell if you could never tell if the ship was moving or not, if it started and stopped. You couldn't feel there was no sensation of it starting or stopping whatsoever. If it maneuvering, it was just like sitting here.
Do you ever play catch or something, or throw a valve to somebody else?
Yeah,
inside
it
the
was
ship,
1G.
And it was normal. There was the ballistic trajectory of anything was
Yes.
the same.
Yep.
No matter what's going on.
Mhm.
So physics didn't change. Physics was
Like I said,
intact inside.
Just rear to center of the ship, there was a ladder system. There was ladders, a fast ladder. And in the middle of that, in between the decks, there was a gravity distortion that was always there. And it was where I guess there were two fields that met. There was a gravity distortion there, and it was you weighed something like 40% less for about 6 feet going down the ladder. Time to go?
Yes.
Okay, sorry guys, I'm on.
Thanks.
Okay, maybe we can get Bernie on now. Bernie, are you ready?
Yeah, you probably have. So by email.
Bernie Conkin. Oh, Michael Crone is here. I guess we can move on to open discussion right now, and as we wait for Bernie to come back, you guys could just take it away. And
What is the name of the conference you're at?
so we're in the Silicon Valley's first annual Secret Space Program Business Development Conference. It's here in San Jose, California. A guy named Pablo Messina flew me and Jeremy out, and there was panels of speakers. There wasn't that many attendees, but I did meet lots of people. It was really good. Making connections and stuff. Tony, I think, gave us pretty much everything that he may have had from his experience that may be engineerable. Again, the information is kind of sketchy and what we can do with it exactly, but it's just interesting to see what we can learn from these kind of people. And maybe if we get somebody else on in the future who also had a similar 20 and back sort of situation, who remembered other things, we can connect dots and figure something else out.
Definitely interesting testimony, regardless of like what you make of it. The physics stories and like just what the descriptions of the experience are fascinating.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Bernie, if you're ready, you can take it away right now and start your presentation.